So hello and welcome to the Flowerlight Mystery School podcast, and this is the second part of the podcast I did about Akhenaten. And today, of course, I'm joined again by with Charlotte.
Yeah, hello.
And Christine.
Hello, good morning.
Not awake yet, I don't think. So just before I carry on into this podcast, I just wanted to mention that I am running a journey to Egypt for the equinox in March 2020, and I'm offering a discount on that journey. So if you want to get in touch with me in relation to that, just email info@flowerlight.com. And I'm also running in Ireland a Flower of Life Sacred Geometry workshop for Imbolic, which is 31st of January to the 2nd of February. And again, if you just want to email info@floweroflight.com. So in the last podcast about Akhenaten, we talked about how his ancestors, who came into Egypt at a time known as Zep Tepi, and they were the divine, they were the immortal, and they were what was eventually became known as the gods. And if you remember, I also mentioned that they were actually in ancient Egypt known as the Neter, and the word Neter means nature. So, we talked about how the Neter created the framework, if you like, or the network or the grid work, which was the blueprint for the souls to incarnate into and to experience a physical manifest reality. Because up to this point of Zep Tepi, and as I mentioned, Zep Tepi means first time, and up to that point, there was nothing in physical matter. So Zep Tepi is about how creation took place and describing it through geometry, and how the grid work for the physical manifest universe was created, and at the same time, how the grid work and the gateways, if you like, out of the 3D physical manifest universe was also created by the same gods and goddesses or Neters known as, or at the time of Zep Tepi. So we also discussed that the story of Atlantis and the fall of consciousness and how it's told in Egypt about we have the gods at Zep Tepi, and then we had the Shemshu Hor, who were semi-divine. The gods were purely divine, the gods were semi-divine, the Shemshu Hor were semi-divine, and then we had the kings who were mortal. So that's shown as we mentioned, the fall of consciousness. So Akhenaten was an ancestor of those original beings that would have come in to Egypt at Zep Tepi. Now, Zep Tepi is talking about a body of knowledge which became known as alchemy. But it's really a highly advanced quantum physics would be a more accurate way to describe the knowledge that was passed down from the time of Zep Tepi through the Shemshu Hor. If you remember, they carried out the plan and created the network of ancient sites that's made up of
the grid.
The grid.
Sorry.
And the physical grid is made up of all the ancient sites, the temples, the mounds, the pyramids, all over Earth. And above the physical grid is the higher consciousness grid, or the higher consciousness network, which of course is invisible to the eye, but to which we attune when we ascend from the third dimension. So what Akhenaten was doing was he was resurrecting, if you like, or reactivating or bringing back the knowledge of his own ancestors from the time of Zep Tepi. And that knowledge, as I mentioned, was of creation, the story of how creation took place, told through geometry and numbers.
Yeah.
Wow. And also the mystery schools of Akhenaten, it was mostly women that Akhenaten took through into immortality or ascension, if you like. And the school that Akhenaten, the aspect of the mysteries that Akhenaten was teaching was known as the right eye, and that's all to do with the geometry
Yeah.
So the entire sequence of geometry from seed of life to Metatron's cube, they are actually information, fields of information, and activation codes, which when fully integrated and when the initiate worked with the geometry and understood, and how they understood was by learning how to do it from, how to draw the geometry from your very first dot that you place on your page all the way up to Metatron's cube. And in this way, what they were actually doing was learning the blueprint. The blueprint of how they descended into the physical third dimension. The blueprint of how they went from the gods at Zep Tepi through the semi-divine beings and through the mortal beings, because that's the path that we've all taken into physical incarnation. So the science of the mystery schools and the science that Akhenaten was reactivating and teaching through geometry was, as we know, ascension. And ascension is the opposite, if you like, from what we just said. So the creation of the grid to descend from pure energy into physical form. But the grid also works for when you're in physical form to ascend back out into your pure energy form. So in other words, to go back the opposite way from mortal to what was known in ancient Egypt as Shemshu Hor, or in ancient Ireland they were known as the Tuatha and back up to completely divine. And that's the cycle of every human being.
Yeah.
So this technology and this science of the mystery schools that Akhenaten was re-establishing is a living wisdom today. This is not something that happened thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago that people once knew thousands and it's dead now. This is a living wisdom.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's so living that it's actually written in your DNA.
Wow.
It's written in your field of consciousness. And our fields of consciousness, if you like, you might think, for example, Christine, that you have your own consciousness field. I have my own consciousness field. Charlotte has their own consciousness field. And they are, you know, I won't say, well, yeah, what we talked about before about the morphic fields.
Yeah.
They're fields of information. So we might think that consciousness, first of all, is inside our head.
Which it is not.
And that we have our own individual consciousness, if you like. But actually, when we come into the third dimension, we do experience the illusion of separation and therefore the illusion of the fact that your consciousness is private and only located to you. But that is an illusion, and in actual fact, all the consciousness fields at their highest and finest point is one.
Yeah, connected, yeah.
So if this information is written in the consciousness field and it's all one, then basically what we're saying is this information is everywhere all at the same time. It's holographic. So Akhenaten was re-establishing the mystery schools because of the corruption that had taken place in ancient Egypt by the Amun priesthood. Now, as I mentioned, each area in ancient Egypt held an aspect of this science. But each area also held the whole of the science. So
the whole of the science?
Yeah. So, in other words, I'll just take, say, for example, one temple. One temple in an area. One temple in an area would specialise, like, in other words, the hieroglyphs on the wall, how the temple was built in itself, is all telling a story in terms of geometry and numbers. And each temple or each site would tell a different story, a different part of the overall science, if you like. The science of dissension and ascension, that's what we're talking about here, the science of alchemy. And let's say each temple would tell a different part, or each temple is a different page in the book, if you like.
Yeah.
So while each temple is a different page, it's also the whole book as well.
Yeah.
Because while the temple is telling the story, or they might say a temple is dedicated to a certain aspect of the knowledge.
Yeah.
Yes, it's dedicated to a certain aspect of the knowledge, but at the same time, it contains all the information.
It's like
of the whole book.
Like the hologram.
It's the hologram.
Exactly,
thing, yeah.
exactly. It's
It's
holographic.
a bit of it and the whole thing
The
at the same
dot.
time.
The first
And the-
dot in the flower of life, right? It's all like...
It's all holographic. And the temples themselves are the interface between the third dimension and the higher dimensions.
Exactly, yeah.
And so Akhenaten's mystery school was the right eye. So the mystery schools were divided in three. You had the left eye of the left eye of Thoth, the right eye of Ra, and the middle eye of Horus. And Akhenaten was teaching the right eye of Ra. So,
Why was that so specific?
well, as I mentioned earlier, it was mostly women that he brought through the mysteries. So one of the main goals, apart from experiencing what we might consider today as a near-death experience, and actually I want to say this, the ancient people, when they were going through these initiation processes and consciously and deliberately experiencing near-death experiences, I just want to make it clear that these ancient people were not committing suicide. They weren't attempting to kill themselves. The death that they were having was a sensory death. So when you hear of people going inside tombs, dark places, caves, to be alone and to meditate, for example, the same thing, they act as the same way as a sensory deprivation chamber.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that, yeah,
So it's a death of the senses. So in the ancient world, these people were not trying to commit suicide or kill themselves. That was not part of their science or their philosophy or their code or anything else. It was a sensory death. Simple. It was, if you can imagine, going into a sensory deprivation chamber and withdrawing from this world. So therefore, you're going inside yourself rather than, and so you've died to the senses. That's what we're talking about here. And that experience is extremely powerful. And in that way, withdrawing of the senses opens the third eye for the initiate to experience the higher dimensions of themselves. So that's just a side note that I just wanted to clarify in regard to the fact that these people were not trying to kill themselves, and it had nothing to do with that.
like the sensory tanks in Stranger Things, if anyone's seen that show.
What is it?
Where like the main character, like she floats in like a salt bath and like
Exactly, yeah.
covers her eyes, and she enters like this like kind of dark like plane where she can like see like other.
Well, it's
dimensions
interesting
and
you're
stuff.
saying the bath, because you've been inside the Great Pyramid and you've
Yes.
been inside the King's Chamber. And when you look at the sarcophagus, doesn't it look very like a bath?
Yeah, it's like it looks like a bath.
It looks like a bath. So if you think that they were lying inside there,
Well, yeah.
and in actual fact, an interesting point that you're making, when the pyramid was opened in the most modern time, and they went inside and they found the sarcophagus in the King's Chamber to be empty, what they did find inside was all this white powder.
I thought you were gonna say that.
Yeah. So residue, yeah. So I'll just give you, maybe you already have an inkling of what that is, but I'll give you an indication that when the initiates would have opened the third eye and had these activations, the final activations inside the sarcophagus in the King's Chamber, they would have produced a lot of dimethyltryptamine and DMT, and that substance is a naturally occurring substance inside the human body.
Yes.
And it happens when huge amounts of it are released when you're born and when you die, and it can happen in other times throughout your life, but they're the two most times.
Kind of
Significant.
more commonly would
Very
be
significant
like
times.
Like a chemical one would be LSD,
The average.
and a natural one would be ayahuasca, plant-based.
Yeah,
that would
yeah.
cause the
but,
same
But
thing.
dimethyltryptamine naturally occurs in your body.
Yes, I know.
So what I'm saying to you is, this will give you an idea. The mystery school masters, or alchemists, they were also known as, would have known how to trigger dimethyltryptamine in their own body.
Wow.
They would have known how to do that naturally.
Yes.
So everything that we do and use false substances for, they knew how to do naturally.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
They
in
called it
ancient,
the great work.
so also when the Amun priesthood had taken over, they kept all the information for themselves.
Yeah.
They didn't want to share this information with the people. Why? Because it's the most powerful knowledge in the universe.
Yeah. And they
It
want
is the
control.
universal language of shape and number. It's the universal language.
Well, if you-
It can't be tampered with.
No.
It can't be tampered with. That's why Always accurate. It's the universal language, and it can't be tampered with. And it's as accurate on all the planes of existence as it is in the third dimension.
Yeah, people can perceive it and distribute it in different ways. But
Exactly.
but it's the same thing.
Well, even just my point of view would be like, basically, it's they kept it to themselves because then that knowledge, like, why would you care about gold and palaces and houses and cars if you knew that's what life was really about?
Well, they didn't. I mean, the whole idea
They're keeping it to themselves.
Yeah. And the whole idea of the treasures of ancient Egypt, you know, and the treasure hunters going to Egypt looking for the gold inside the tombs and all that was just a distraction.
Yeah.
To you know, stories that were created.
A false grid over...
Exactly. Take away... I mean, the true knowledge in Egypt is nothing to do with gold or anything else. The true knowledge is written on the walls. And is actually encoded and embedded in the construction of the actual ancient site with the standard unit of measurement that was used. Because the standard unit of measurement that was used in every ancient site is a story in and of itself. It tells information in and of itself.
Knowledge is power.
Well,
Exactly.
Shashat and Thoth together, when she was the golden measure, right? Like, to build a temple.
So the symbol of Akhenaten's mystery school was the right eye.
Right.
The right eye of Ra. And it was also the circle with the dot.
Right.
So, and that's how you actually, that's the very first thing you do when you start to draw your sacred geometry is you have a blank page, you get the center of your page, there's various different ways you can do this, but this is the way it was shown in the mystery schools. You get the center of, you put your dot in the center and you place your compass point on that dot, and then you inscribe your circle around the first dot. So the circle with the dot was the symbol of Akhenaten's mystery school, but it's also the very first step in the creation of the geometry that leads from seed of life through to egg of life, flower of life, tree of life, fruit of life, and Metatron's cube.
Metatron's cube, yeah.
And
which is everything in the third dimension.
All those geometries, as we said at the end stage, is Metatron's cube. And Metatron's cube yields all the Platonic solids. And the Platonic solids are all the categories in which all forms of matter fall into in terms of shape. And each element and the periodic element of periodic table of elements are contained within the symbol, the flower of life, in terms of their atomic weight and number. And I'll give you an example. When you create your flower of life, the first thing you do is you draw your first circle. Then you draw 3 sets of 6 circles around your first and original circle. So you have 1, 6, 6, 6.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things about 666, 666 is actually to do with the carbon atom.
Yes. Yeah.
And the carbon atom has 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6 electrons. And carbon is the atom of life in the universe, in the third dimension. And so the flower of life represents, among a myriad of things, it represents the carbon atom. So, and...
makes so much sense.
Yeah. And so when you create, for example, the seed of life, which, as I mentioned, it's not the first stage because there are other stages, but the seed of life, when you've completed that, you've actually created a torus. So the torus is the energy portal through which everything descends, all energy descends into the third dimension. And the torus is like, for example, and I always describe it this way because for me it seems like an easy way to understand it. If you have a bath, for example, and you pull the plug out of the bath and you see the water as it spirals and goes down. Well, if you imagine yourself when you were in pure energy form and you want to descend from pure creator, loving, intelligent creator energy, and you were seeking to have a physical experience and to descend into a physical illusion of reality, then what you would do is create a tear or a hole so that you could pour through.
Oh, yeah, like the bat.
Yeah. So the portals, in other words, on this grid work that's created all over the earth, where the lines cross.
Yeah, the vortex.
The ley lines?
The ley lines cross, where they cross.
Yeah.
They make a portal. And the more lines that run through the center, the bigger the energy portal.
Wow, yeah.
And remember, I said that the Great Pyramid sits at the exact center of the Earth.
Yeah.
So it's on the biggest energy portal on Earth.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the symbol of the cross, for example, you know, the way you see in religion, Jesus and the Son on the cross, and Jesus is at the center of the cross.
Yes.
Well, the center of the cross is actually symbolizing the vortex or the torus.
Yeah, yeah.
Same in any church where the altar is. The churches are usually in the cross form, cruciform. The vortex point is
Yes,
the altar.
the temples were all in cruciform shape as well.
Yeah, so it's
And the inner sanctuary, or the Holy of Holies, was right at the center of the cross.
and that's your third eye, your pineal gland.
So it represents the vortex.
Yeah.
Or, if you want to look at it really simply, it represents the hole through which your consciousness came through.
Exactly.
So consciousness was always compared to water.
Yeah.
Because consciousness exists in different states. It can be a solid, it can be a liquid, it can be a gas. We're the same.
That's it.
We're the same. We can be gaseous, in other words, ether.
Yeah.
You know, we can be solid,
The
which
fifth
we
element.
the illusory thing of solid, which we think we are in this physical body,
Mm-hmm.
and fluid. I mean, we're mostly made up of water anyway.
Yeah, that's like-
And water is an interdimensional substance.
Well, that
Yes.
reminds me of like the mortals, the Shemshuhor, and then the Zep Tepi, right?
Exactly.
It's like the Zep Tepi is the gas, the Shemshuhor.
Very good, Charlotte.
Thank you.
That's exactly what I was
The
getting
pennies
at.
are dropping.
Yeah. The pennies
That's
are dropping,
that's
guys.
the three states that we are capable of existing in. Now, I'm not saying we can only exist in those
No.
three states, but that's why consciousness was compared to water in the third dimension.
Because water can be a liquid.
Liquid, gaseous, and solid.
Yes.
When it's frozen, it's ice.
That's it.
When it's liquid, obviously it's water. And when it's heated up to a certain degree, it becomes
steam.
gaseous. Now, what's the difference between those three things? The difference is in their state.
That's it.
Yeah.
And temperature is also involved
But-
in whether it's like a liquid or a gas or so.
Water is conscious.
And
it's
what
a
is temperature?
library.
Temperature is friction, which is to do with vibration.
That's
Yes,
yeah.
yeah.
That's it.
So that means it's either
Whoa.
vibrating either very quickly or
Yeah.
more slowly.
Yeah.
That's it.
You know. So if you can consider sorry, Christine. What
No,
were
I
you
was
saying?
just saying that water is like a library. It holds all information.
Exactly.
That's
It's
it, yeah, I was gonna
interdimensional.
say that.
So I'm saying whatever state you're in, your information is intact.
Yeah, you see, our consciousness.
When you're frozen in your block of 3D, you have to connect to
it's
that.
the wave
harder.
and the particle.
Yeah, exactly. The wave
Yeah.
and the particle.
So if you think of your consciousness, as you said, as water.
Yeah.
So we can think of that as the divine, the neater, the gods
Yeah,
at Zep Tepi. They were water, okay?
Yeah.
And what they were doing were creating all these holes by creating the grid work and the network
Yeah.
using geometry. But it's sacred geometry, don't forget. And the sacred geometry contains the sacred proportions. So when we poured our water or our consciousness
Yeah.
through all these holes,
Yeah.
we had to make sure that we did so in such a way that the physical form that we were creating would grow in harmony and proportion. In other words,
To as above so below.
in other words, exactly. In other words, we had the same proportions in our body as the whole universe has.
Yeah. As above so below.
Exactly.
That's it.
And the reason for the proportions as well is to make sure that, for example, your right arm doesn't grow 10 times bigger than your left arm. Or,
divine.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's to keep everything in balance.
Yeah, the
Balance,
Fibonacci, the Fibonacci sequence, why everything grows in the patterns it grows in.
So I think, even though I'm kind of describing it as like water going down a plug hole, I think it's a good visualization. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it makes it easy to think of your consciousness as water. And when you're descending, in other words, going from pure consciousness, which were the at time of the Neter, and descending into the physical form. So you're going down the plug hole.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
But now what happens when you're down and you want to get back up?
So that's
Yeah.
harder than going down.
You see? So this information was sent down in the water. Yeah?
The
Yeah.
Holy Nile.
From the time of Zep Tepi. It was sent down. The information was in the water. Okay, now I'm using water as
Metaphor.
a metaphor for consciousness.
Yeah.
Okay? So it was in the water.
Yes.
And as it went down the plug hole, the information got carried down. And so as the water froze, in other words, as our energy coalesced and condensed and became physical bodies, the information is still there.
That's it.
It's just now it's frozen. It's not moving around, so it's not actually flowing freely into our mind. It's not, but it's still there. So all we have to do is release it. And it was sent down to us so that we did it. We created the holes and sent our water down.
Self-created.
Exactly. For us to, when it came to a time when we needed this information.
Yeah. It was never lost.
It was never lost. It would go off like an alarm clock in every
Yes.
person's head who was ready. And they would activate the information again at the time.
The year 144,000, is that where?
The reason Akhenaten chose the geometry is because the geometry is one of the only things that acts equally on both the male and female energy at the same time.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you're right.
So it activates in perfectly equal proportion the male and female energy at the same time.
Because of like the measuring and like the logical side of it, and then
Yeah.
the more kind of
Intuitive.
fluid, artistic or creative thing.
Yeah.
Emotional.
Yeah.
Now,
Visual.
at the time, what had happened was I mentioned that the M1 priesthood had become completely corrupt.
Yes.
And
No longer following the laws of Mat, universal law.
Yeah, and an interesting point, you should say that, because Mat was, as I explained in the last one, was she symbolized universal balance, truth, justice, and order.
Yes.
And she also represented, there's a thing called the feather of Mat.
Yeah, the ostrich
And
feather.
she wore a feather in her hair. And in the book of Coming Forth by Light, Thoth records the deeds of the newly deceased. You know, remember we spoke about
Yes.
the book of Coming Forth by Light, aka the Book of the Dead. And that is the 12 steps that the soul has to take after it has died or passed from the physical form in order to enter into the land of the Neter. Or Netherland, or Neterland, or Neverland. Peter Pan land, you know what I mean? Tir na Nog,
Tir na Nog in the Irish word.
High Brazil,
Yeah, High Brazil, yeah.
you know. Shambhala, Avalon, you know.
Avalon, yeah.
They're all the same.
That's Celtic.
So Mat represented truth, order, justice, and balance in the universe. And the idea of Akhenaten taking women through and teaching them the kind of, you know, you asked me earlier, why all women? Because at the time of the M1 priesthood, not only had they taken the information and kept it for themselves,
Yeah.
and what they did was they kept the information for themselves, but gave the people the symbols in the form of statues. Do you know what I mean? They, like, say, for example, like, they would represent a Neter or a god in the form of a statue.
Yeah, so they would put the information there, but they wouldn't like tell
Yeah,
you what
so
it's for.
the real information of the Neter they're not meant to be represented as people. The gods and goddesses
Or principles
of the ancient
Oh.
mythology are not meant to be represented as
So
Principles
you
people.
of
mean, so you
nature.
mean they kind of like humanize?
No, they
them
They humanized
downgraded it.
them,
yeah.
Downgraded it.
instead of
gain
being like a
symbol.
principle, like a teaching.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the Neter of ancient Egypt, in other words, the Egyptologists who translated the word Neter into gods and goddesses, what the Neter really were different aspects of a science. So Isis told one story of the science. Osiris told a different aspect of it. Nefertiti told a different aspect of it. Horus held a different aspect of it. So they were never meant to be thought of as human beings. They weren't. They were aspects of the story of creation.
Yeah.
And the females were the feminine aspect and the male were the male aspect.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what the M1 priesthood did was they took all that information and they made the gods and goddesses into people.
Yeah.
So they took, for example, Isis and they made her into a statue and said, this is what Isis looks like. Isis was never meant to represent an actual person. Isis represented a body of knowledge.
Yeah.
Yes.
A way of being.
The same as Osiris, a body of knowledge.
The female
So
Yeah.
component of it.
what they did was they took the knowledge and the aspects that were the Neter and they represented them as statues. And so what they had was the people worshipping statues. So the people, now I'm not saying that's the only way they did it, obviously, but I'm just saying that's
Most
one of
prominent
the
example.
ways, it's one example of the ways that the Amun priesthood made people
A false grid.
forget.
Yeah.
They made the false grid as well. Very good, Charlotte. They made people to forget by. I mean, if you break the link of knowledge, if you don't pass knowledge down to your child, Only one.
They
only takes one generation.
or who those people.
If you don't pass information down to Charlotte,
Yes.
then it's gone.
It's gone. Absolutely.
It's gone down the link because she therefore can't pass it to her. So it only takes one generation
That's it.
to break the chain of
And actually,
knowledge.
that's why the Druids never wrote anything down. It was all
Yeah, it was all
history.
oral. Yeah. So, and that's an interesting thing because
Passed by word down.
Akhenaten's law of one,
Yeah.
which his mystery school was also known, is also the same as the Brehon law. The Brehon law and the ancient Irish Brehon law and the law of one are the same.
Wow.
Now, the Brehon law, that's a newer name for it
Yeah.
than it would have been known in the ancient world.
But
So
it wouldn't have been called Brehon.
No.
Yeah, probably not.
That's just the Irish word for it.
It's just, they're all anglicized,
But
that's
it would
the
be
Tower of
mad.
Babel and the language and everything else. But the reason Akhenaten took the people, and mostly women, was because what the Amun priesthood had done, as I said, was keep all the information for themselves, give the people back
Like
a distorted version of the information,
That's the word.
and gave them the statues to worship rather than giving them the knowledge to empower them.
Yes.
So this was all about control and manipulation.
That's it.
I mean, it's really
So
like,
the Amun priesthood
we'll
were
tell
like-
you what God is telling you, rather than empowering them as a sovereign, bringing up sovereignty, as a sovereign being.
And that's
which
an
is
interesting point because sovereign has become linked to money when sovereign is actually meant.
independence, freedom.
So,
yeah, exactly. And didn't the English, weren't they calling their money sovereigns?
Yeah. So,
There you go. Part of the distortion again. They give you a little bit of it, but they put you down the wrong road to money, which is man-made and really means nothing. It only has the power it has because people think it has power.
Yeah.
Right? It's really just paper and lumps.
So exactly. Yeah. So
More distortion.
So the Amun priesthood had basically through all the things they were doing. I just gave you one or two examples there, but through all the various ways that they took the knowledge away from the people and kept them in the dark, and through all the various ways they did that, they actually plunged the people into a patriarchal society. So the people were being now, ruled and controlled by their own left brain, but also by all men as well. So they put the person themselves into a patriarchal state of being. In other words, the person has now become more used to using their male energy and their logical mind.
Yeah, so they're completely out of balance. It's not about balance, which is what it's all about.
Yeah, that's what the Amun priesthood did. They plunged people into their male energy, into their male logical mind, and they took away the whole feminine, creative, creator consciousness.
Yeah, which has nothing
knowledge.
to do with language, right?
Yeah, to ask, was the Amun priesthood during the time of Akhenaten, or was it before or after?
Well, they existed before because, again, Amun is one of the Neter.
Okay.
So Amun actually means this is the hidden one.
Okay.
And it also means, Amun also means the coiled serpent in the mound of creation. Okay? Now, Amun itself, or Amen, you can say as well.
I was just going to say, and in every religion we know, you have to say Amen.
Yeah. So,
Ritual
the aspect
ritual
of,
healing.
remember I told you every temple is like a page in the book.
Yes.
And every area in Egypt is like a chapter. Because each area could have 10 or 12 temples. Yeah. So, in Luxor and Karnak Temple, would have been the pages that were telling the aspect that related to Amun.
Yeah.
Now, Amun, that's another whole thing, but Amun is to do with a phase of the sun. And that's one aspect of it now. Yeah. And it's to do with the phase of the sun when it sets and goes into the darkness.
Yeah.
So it's the hidden one.
Yeah.
So,
and coincidentally, that's the one that they all use. So.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
And
hidden information.
Yeah. So,
in Judaism, Christianity,
and so what the Amun priesthood had done, so the knowledge of Amun is part of the whole sacred divine knowledge.
Yeah, so it's impartial.
But what actually happened was real life human being men came along and were living in Luxor and Karnak Temple and were pretending to uphold the sacred knowledge.
Yeah.
And over time and over a period of time, they became more and more corrupt. They became infiltrated.
Powerful, basically decided they learned how to take all of the best things in society for themselves.
They literally usurped the real wisdom keepers.
Yeah.
Yes.
They were the infiltrators. And this is why when you see, for example, the Illuminati and the Masons and everything else, and why they all use Egyptian symbols. Because it goes back to this time in ancient Egypt, when the Amun priesthood literally broke the cosmic order.
That's
What they did was they plunged the entirety of humanity. Now, even though this happened in Egypt, it affected the whole world to this very day.
Unity consciousness.
They plunged the whole of humanity into a patriarchal, male dominated society. And they plunged the individual itself into its own male energy, its own male consciousness, with the bridge being burned into the feminine. So they destroyed the ability for the people to connect with their creator consciousness. It was closed off. They closed, remember all the holes that was created in Zep Tepi? Well, the Amun priesthood basically closed them off. So that people couldn't get back out.
And they only kept the ones for themselves.
And so it was the Amun priesthood that created all the religions that we have as well. So, I mean, there's, all the religions are based on this ancient knowledge. So the reason Akhenaten was taken mostly women was because, as I mentioned, the geometry, the sacred geometry that was being taught by Akhenaten in the schools it's the only set of symbols, if you want to put it that way, that activate both the right and left brain in equal proportions at the same time. So what Akhenaten was looking to do was to bring things back into balance and to bring things into what's known as a matriarchal society. Now, a matriarchal society, contrary to a patriarchal society, does not mean a society ruled by women.
No.
A matriarchal society means a society that's in perfect balance, male and female. But a patriarchal society means a society ruled by men.
What do you mean, like out of balance? Or
Out of balance.
Yes.
Totally out of balance. But a matriarchal society, you might think that means... Matriarchal means women. So you might think that means, it's all ruled by women, therefore it's still out of balance. Do you know what I mean? But it actually doesn't. A matriarchal society means that it's perfect male and female balance.
Good.
That's what that means.
Yeah.
So Akhenaten was, and I'll just give you an example. Every time Akhenaten signed his name, and his actual name was, part of his name that most people wouldn't know was Ankh-an-Mat. He signed his name always Ankh-an-Mat.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And that meant living in truth. Ankh-an-Mat meant living in truth. And he always, he signed his name Ankh-an-Mat, and then underneath it, he always had this inscription under his name, everywhere his name was written. And that is, I have made no deceptions, I have told no lies. What my heart hated, I did not do. I am one with the invisible God that created me. I will live for millions of years in this truth.
Wow.
Wow. Profound.
Profound.
So when he says here, what my heart hated, I did not do. Now, the heart, you might, if you remember earlier, I was talking about the book of Coming Forth by Light. And there's a part in it where the heart is weighed against the feather.
Feather of Mat.
Against the feather of Mat. And what he's saying here is, what my heart hated, I did not do. In other words, he's saying he acted on the intelligence of his heart.
In other words, his conscience.
Because in ancient Egypt, they didn't see consciousness as being seated in the brain. In other words, I don't mean ancient Egypt, but in the ancient mysteries, they didn't see consciousness as being seated in the brain. Consciousness to them was in the heart.
Oh, so like... So
it
like
was your heart.
So being in touch with your intuition.
Yeah, exactly, your intuition. Yeah. And you always associate the heart with love, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So the seat of consciousness in the heart meant that we were connected with the loving creator consciousness. And when the heart was weighed against the balance of the feather to see was it full of light, that literally didn't mean light in terms of weight. It did mean that, but not only that. It also meant light.
Actual light.
Actual light.
Light is the information.
Yes. Was it full of information?
Enlightenment.
Oh, yeah.
That also relates to René Descartes, who said the same thing, right?
I think, therefore, I am.
Well, he also said, the soul was not in your head.
Yeah.
Was in your heart.
Well, he kind of located the seat of consciousness at the third eye, didn't he?
Yeah.
So...
French philosopher.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people say that Akhenaten as well had annihilated all other forms of worship, if you like. Only the Aten, which is not true, which wasn't true. I mean, here he actually has Maat in his name.
Right.
Now, Maat was a goddess who was a Neter, but who wasn't the Aten.
Yeah.
So it's not true to say that, he annihilated all other forms of worship. He didn't. What he was trying to do was alert the people to the fact that the Amun priesthood were totally corrupt. They were trying to take over the world. They had already taken over Egypt. They had become more powerful than the kings. They had more land,
they definitely
more
were
wealth,
telling the king
more
what to
everything
do.
else. Now, if you want to know what kind of magic, if you want to put it that way, did these Amun priesthoods know, I'll tell you. These guys knew exactly how people mind worked. They knew exactly how people's minds worked.
Oh.
So therefore they knew how to engineer them, how to make them do what they wanted to do.
Wow.
And they did that through sound and light, the sound and light show.
And it was
Now those people went on to be the same people who are now the Illuminati and the Masons controlling. They're the governments. Well, the governments are puppets and everything else, but they've been controlled by these same
advertising.
Amun priesthood. The
Advertising,
Amun priesthood now go around in shirts and
brainwashing.
ties. Yeah,
It's black magic.
it's all black magic.
And you're
They
really
control
proud of
Hollywood.
spells.
They control, and now we are creating their reality by
Yeah.
allowing them to plant the seeds of their creation in our mind through sound and light, as they always did, through the medium of Hollywood and the TV.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
it.
it.
Because
It's all show.
the individual are such creative and powerful creators. If you've got Madison Avenue telling you what to wear, what to buy, who to be, they're trapping you in their matrix. So literally, you're creating it by thinking about it.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Because thoughts are
Because
so
that is the knowledge of Zep Tepi.
Yeah.
The knowledge of Zep Tepi was, you are the creator, and you manifest your reality. Because we are the gods of Zep Tepi. We are the gods. And that is what the information that was sent down through the Shem Hor and through the mortals
Yeah.
was, we are the creator.
We are.
We
Yeah.
are the creative energy.
It's like that.
Those gods who created in the grid in Zep Tepi,
Are still
they
here.
weren't separate to us. They are us.
Yeah.
No, it's like the thing we were saying earlier.
Exactly.
that If we represent like consciousness is like water,
Yeah,
we're just in our solid state.
exactly. So at Zep Tepi we were water. Now we're
ice
ice.
cubes.
We're ice. So
Right,
it's
the
the
Tepi.
wave and the particle.
Whereas at Tepi we're gas, right?
Or gas. Sorry,
Yeah.
gas. Good girl. Good girl.
I'm on it.
Gas.
I'm on
You're
it, guys.
definitely on it.
Let me go.
You're on it. You're
Look
on
at
it.
me go.
You're very good.
Charlotte's coming to Egypt, so she's
That's
ready
it,
and
I'm
ready
ready,
to go.
guys.
So Zep Tepi and the Neter, we were gas. The Shemshihor were water,
gas.
and we were gas, and the human were ice.
Yeah.
So that's very good. Thank you, Charlotte. So
Keeping you on your toes there.
thank you very much.
No,
you know.
I'm kidding. It's good.
you're dead right. You're dead right.
Oh.
So the whole science of the mystery schools is, and in large part, is about manifestation. As you can see, we're talking about manifesting ourselves in a physical reality.
Yeah.
So basically, your body and your physical form and everybody's physical form is frozen consciousness.
Yes.
Exactly.
They're frozen thoughts. So
And
the word Maat, the name Maat. Sorry, Christine.
I was just going to say, your body is crystalline,
Yeah.
and that's also this diamond plasma crystal light.
Well,
that's
when you
coming in
think
now.
of crystals, they're all sacred geometric shapes.
That's what I'm saying. So it's
And so
it's in your skeleton as well, like your physical
So if you think of the water, as we mentioned, being consciousness, why is sacred geometry sacred? And why has it got anything to do? What has circles and squares and
it has to do with
triangles
your physical fractal
got to
body.
do with spirituality?
Yeah.
And what has it got to do with it?
Yeah.
Well, this is what I'm going to tell you. Again, we have to speak symbolically. And it always had to be put symbolically.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to portray infinite concepts with a
Yeah.
finite brain.
Exactly.
In a third dimension.
Yeah, it's your
We're bringing
receiver.
high-
It's your
exactly,
receiver. It's
exactly.
not the information. It's like the capability of you to receive the information.
Yeah, so we have to kind of tell it in parables.
Yeah, exactly. In parable and symbol.
So if you can imagine, as we mentioned, the gods were the ether, the gas, okay? The Shemshu-Hor, the semi-divine, were the water,
Water.
yeah? And then the mortals were the ice. Now, why does the sacred geometry important? Because every single bit of that ice, all ice that freezes, right, does so in a sacred geometric shape.
It's like fractals,
Snowflakes.
You see what?
crystalline.
Fractals, exactly.
I was just thinking that in my head. Yeah.
Exactly. So do you see what I mean? Why the geometry is important? Because everything in the third dimension, including you, me, trees, grass, dogs, flowers, and Christine, everything coalesces and condenses into physical form. According to these shapes. Now, you don't see it with your eye. When I look at you now, I don't see sacred geometry. But if I had a microscope...
Dodecahedron you are today.
If I had... I'm going into your atoms, Charlotte.
Going in.
I'm going in. I'm diving in, man. So if I had a microscope and I looked right into one of your atoms, I would see pure sacred geometry.
That's right.
I would see the flower of life.
That's right. It would be buzzing with light because you're bioluminescent.
Yeah.
Our eyes can't see it. So you're walking around glowing.
Well, you're not just glowing, you're actually giving off light.
That's right.
Because each one of your atoms, all the electrons in your atoms, do what's called an orbital jump. They jump from one orbit to another.
Oh, wow.
And they jump from a lower orbit to a higher orbit. And when they fall back again, they release packages of electromagnetic energy, which is called light. And so basically, if you were to see yourself, every atom in your body is going poof, 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 every 5 seconds. Yeah. Releasing
that makes
every
sense.
more than 5 seconds, every
how-
fractions of seconds, releasing packages of electromagnetic energy, which is actually light.
Yeah,
so if you could see you in your pure form, you would be just ejecting these beams of light.
The speed of light, right?
Where when you're in physical form, you're not at the speed of light.
Yeah.
But your particles,
But you're reflecting it.
your particles within, you're more the reflection. No, you're right, because when light is reflected, it slows down. It has to. You know, when it passes through a prism, remember we said this before? When light passes through the prism, it has to slow down.
Yeah.
So on its journey from the gas, from pure ether, from being the gods, on its journey down into being the water and the semi-divine, and then into the mortals and the physical, on its journey, it has to kind of...
It has to lower its velocity.
It has to lower, it has to lose speed.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and get slower. Because you can imagine, let's say, weight, it has to lose weight, or put on weight, rather. Because you can imagine water is going to be lighter, let's say, than ice, you know?
Yeah.
Because when
Density.
ice freezes, it actually changes its geometric structure. The geometric structure of liquid water is not the same as frozen ice.
No.
Exactly.
It changes its geometric, it actually changes its form altogether. Wow. So if you can imagine everything in this 3D and compare it to ice, and then visualize that all that ice is in sacred geometric shapes. Now, as I said, you don't see it when you look at somebody with your eye, but if I was to look in your body on a microscopic level at all your atoms and molecules, you would see the geometry there.
Yeah.
On that shape and that level. Sorry.
Yeah, would that be like in your DNA?
Absolutely, yeah, in your DNA. Cool. So the double helix of the DNA actually appears in your flower of life as petals of the flower.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So that's what they were drawing, the DNA. Oh. So this is how far advanced this knowledge was.
Yes.
This is quantum physics.
That's it.
Yes.
Quantum physics in the ancient world. I mean, we think they were primitive. They were more highly advanced than we are.
No,
Exactly.
No.
So just on that note, I'll give you an example. The root word of mat is ma and means to observe. Now, we talked about this before, but there's an experiment called the observer effect, where the results of that experiment showed that solid particles do not become solid particles unless there is a consciousness there to observe them into existence.
Yeah, it's the effect of it.
Wow.
So, in other words, unless there is a consciousness observing
The experiment.
itself, really, or observing consciousness, it does not become solid.
Yeah. It stays in a wave pattern.
It stays in a wave pattern. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, remember I told you in the beginning the creation happened by the creator projecting itself into a mirror image.
Yes.
So, if you think of that first step in creation, right? The creator projected itself, and then what did it do? It observed itself.
Whoa. Yeah.
Yeah.
It observed itself into
Yeah.
physical manifestation.
Wow.
I know it's they're hard concepts to get our head around, but
it reminds me of like in-death experiences, right? Where people say they see their body and then like at some point they choose to go back if they do so.
Yeah.
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 They
And that's
themselves
they
back.
observe. That's exactly it. They observe themselves.
Yeah.
So
The links are linking.
so basically, the geometry that was being taught
Yeah.
in the mystery schools that Akhenaten re-established was the geometry of Zep Tepi in the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So the geometry, what we understood when we were divine, before we became physical.
Mm-hmm.
And he did so because he knew the M1 priesthood were trying to take over, which they eventually did, because it's the M1 priesthood who are controlling everything today.
Still,
They're the governments, the presidents, they're the shadow government, the secret government, the Illuminati, the Masons, the
ones
whatever
with-
you want to call them. That's them.
it's
That's
literally
them.
their information.
And they're
for
social
thousands of
engineering
years.
people
Yeah.
all over the world.
Absolutely social engineering.
Through the same thing that they always did, the sound and light show
Yeah.
Yeah.
of media, Hollywood, and just frequency and vibration.
That's it.
So,
And is that why? That's one of the reasons why he moved to what they call now Tel Armana, but Akhenaten.
yeah, well,
city to-
Tel Armana and Akhenaten, the place where he built
built
his new
his-
city, is directly in the geodetic centre of Egypt. So it was again about bringing things
Back
into balance
order.
because
Yeah.
the M1 priesthood had broken the cosmic order. They were enslaving the people. They had taken over the wealth and control of the
Culture.
of the kings and taken all their land and their wealth, and they were literally enslaving people, taking their money, taking their land, even taking their children.
Yeah, slavery.
they
there you go.
created the
Child
whole-
slavery. What a thing! It still exists.
They created the whole tax system,
yes. Oh, there's the diabolical.
and they
one.
created what we would all
Money.
know as black magic.
Yes.
But they're also the ones who created the whole satanic devil
Yes.
type of thing, worshipy thing, and the whole idea that there was a Satan,
Yeah.
because in the mystery schools there was an aspect of the information known as Set, and it has nothing to do with Satan. But you'll hear people saying that's where Satan came from, was the ancient mystery schools, and Set was the first image of Satan. That's all not true. That is not true.
Yeah,
Set had nothing. Set represented the opposition.
Yeah.
Set represented something that you had to overcome.
That's it.
Yeah. An obstacle.
And when you overcame it, you were better than you were before you
That's
overcame it.
Yeah. It's
It's nothing to do with evil or the
yourself.
devil
So
or anything.
they used fear to
Fear is their
Major weapon.
that is their weapon.
Yeah.
That's their weapon.
Yeah.
Fear is their weapon. Manipulation is what they want, the result.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're the ones who are controlling the earth today. So you can see that Akhenaten did not actually manage to carry off the experiment that he was trying. Now,
No.
he was successful to a very large degree,
Yeah.
but you wouldn't have seen it back then in the time.
No,
His
only
success is exactly.
Yeah.
His success is only becoming apparent now.
Well, because
because
of the change
all
of
of
the energy.
those, but all of us all of us who were taken through the mystery schools by
that are now
Akhenaten
reincarnated.
are now here to remember
Yeah. That's exactly it.
for this time that we're meant to remember. So I just want to kind of tie this in as well to Ireland. So as I mentioned, the migration of people with this knowledge would have gone into Egypt. Now, there was more than one wave of people that went into Egypt from the areas known as Atlantis. There was more than one wave. So it happened over a period of time, and waves of people going in over a period of time. So, and the fall of consciousness and the Amun takeover of the Amun priesthood also happened over a long period of time. And we mentioned before as well that Thutmose III was the one who kick-started before Akhenaten the mystery schools, because he had an encounter with the Atlantean tribes. Remember,
Right.
we mentioned that one in the last podcast.
Yes.
And he restarted the mystery schools at Karnak and Luxor Temple, Thutmose III. And Thutmose III is the great-great-grandfather of Akhenaten. Now, one of the interesting things about Thoth, and the way it's written in the name Thutmose III, Thoth would have been spelt in ancient Egyptian, if you like, would have been written as with TWT.
Okay. TWT.
Thoth.
Yeah.
Now, translated into Hebrew, the T becomes a D.
Oh.
And that becomes DWD, which is Daoud. Daoud is David. So, Thutmose III is the biblical King David.
Wow.
Now, that is interesting. Why? What's the symbol of Ireland?
The harp?
Of
What? Oh, do you mean like
whose harp is it?
Brian Brew.
life?
David's harp.
I was sorry. I thought it was Brian Brew. No.
The harp of David.
Wonderful.
They call it Dagda. David's
Yeah,
harp.
that's it, yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay, that.
So, well, I mean, you'll see the Harp of David written in many places, the Harp of David.
Yeah.
And
I should know I'm a harpist, gosh.
that's the symbol of Ireland. And there's a story in ancient Egypt of how Thoth created the first harp by stretching a string across a tortoise shell.
Wow.
So, and on a side note, when you go into Dendra Temple, you see all these
the beautiful
beings with wings, with harps.
Yeah.
You know, angels don't play these harps.
Well,
Yeah.
also,
Yeah, that's actually a book. Angels don't play this harp, and harp in the book stands for High Auroral Research Program, and it's to do with weather manipulation based on the patents of Nikola Tesla.
30 years. No, but I was thinking.
So actually, they can control the weather. People say, "Oh, but they can't control the weather. They can't make a storm happen." Yes, they can.
No, but I was just thinking of also the tortoise shell and the strings also represent.
But don't forget the geometry
octaves.
on the tortoise shell.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course.
As well.
Yeah.
So you're looking at geometry and vibration
But I'm thinking
together.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The octaves creating the realities.
Yes,
The dimensions.
exactly. Like
the
the string represents the vibration and the frequency, and the tortoise shell represents the geometry.
Yes.
Because geometry changes, you know,
With
vibration.
vibration.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the sound, the pitch changes the shape.
Yeah. Did you ever go in somewhere that's really
Cymatics.
echoey
Yes.
Yeah.
and it can make you feel a bit dizzy?
Yeah.
Well, that's just an example of how shape affects your consciousness. So the different shapes of the temples
Like going into a cathedral.
made you
and people
feel
singing.
certain different ways.
Yeah, wow.
You know, you could walk into one shape, and the echoey feeling might make your heart feel like it's pounding.
Yeah.
A lot of people experience that when they go into the
Well, in Luxor, in
the Great
Temple of
Pyramid
Man.
in the King's Chamber,
Oh, yeah.
and that's because the King's Chamber and the sarcophagus itself is tuned to the human heartbeat.
Yes.
So it's a heart activation that you're going to
same
have when you
hertz.
go in,
Yeah.
and people say all the time, "Oh my God, my heart's pounding."
That's right. I remember.
You know? So
That's it.
you get different effects in different temples. You know, and that's based on the geometry and the shape that's used, because it will give different effects.
Yeah.
So, so the idea that during the Exodus, like when now there was a couple of Exodus of people that left Egypt, let's say, but the one I'm talking about is the Exodus of the people that went out of Egypt and into Ireland, and they were the lineage of Akhenaten.
Yeah.
And the reason they left was because Akhenaten tried his experiment for 17 years. He co-reigned with Amenhotep III, who was his father. And he co-reigned with him for 17 years. And he tried to bring back this law of one.
Okay.
Science of love,
Yeah.
balance, equality. But like now, I mean, people were so ingrained in, you know, their materialistic things at the time
Well, stuck in the program.
that they didn't want to hear what he had to say. It'd be like you going into a load of people and saying, "Look, materialism is not the way to go. Let go of all your material things. Let go of your car, your big car and your big house, and forget about all the money that you're earning, and just go inwards and look in towards yourself and connect with your own God self." You know, what would you say? You'd say,
Bugger off.
bugger off, yeah.
Yeah.
We're too busy with our thing here to
And
listen
also,
to you.
for me, people's identity of who they are has been brainwashed into this thing. Like you have no chance to be spiritual and move into your chakra because you're being assaulted 24 hours a day that this is what reality is about. So it takes a strong individual, you know, to reject all that.
So, as I mentioned earlier as well, all this sacred ancient information was turned into religion. And that was the trick of the M1 priesthood. That's why all religions, at the end of all religions, Judaism, Islam, Catholicism, but at the end of all religions, you say Amen.
Yes.
That's their stamp.
That's it, yeah.
So, I'm not talking about any one particular religion, I'm talking about all religions. And all religions contain this information. But they're also distorted. They contain a distorted version of this information on one level. Because, for example, it says that Moses wrote the Torah. And it says how Moses was put in a basket and floated down the river when he was a child and was reared by somebody else. Well, I mentioned before that Akhenaten is the biblical Moses, and that sounds weird when you say it at first. But when you read about the life of Akhenaten, Akhenaten was sent as a child secretly away and was reared by somebody else other than his mother. He was sent to Heliopolis and reared by the priests and priestesses of Heliopolis.
Which means the city of the sun.
Heliopolis is the city of the sun, and where the Ennead.
Was it called the
On, it was called.
Yeah.
On Inu or Anu.
Yeah.
Heliopolis is a Greek word.
Yeah.
But it means city of the sun. And Inu, Anu or On is referring to the Ennead.
Yes.
Or the Nine.
The 9.
And the 9 is the code. The number 9 is the code that the entire creation is based on. So it's code. Which is interesting. But so it's you can see when you look at the life of Akhenaten how at first it sounds like Moses is Akhenaten, it sounds crazy, but when you actually read the life of Akhenaten and see the similarities, then you begin to realise
There's
actually
a lot of parallels. Even supposedly Akhenaten found the Emerald Tablets, and we have the
well, the
commandments.
story of
The burning bush.
Moses going up the mountain and all the burning bush is the story of Akhenaten and the temple of Hathor on Serabat El Kadim, which I think we
were
spoke
talking
about in
before.
the last.
Just trying to tie it in with what we
And the
talked about.
creation of the monatomic elements.
Yeah. Monatomic gold.
Orbitally
White
rearranged
powder,
monatomic
wow.
elements,
Yeah.
yeah. So, Akhenaten is given, or sorry, Moses is given credit of writing the Torah. So if we, it was Akhenaten who wrote the Torah. So the word Torah and Taurus, remember we said when we created the seed of life, what we're actually creating is a Taurus. And the Taurus are the holes through which
Yes.
the consciousness...
Your chakra system goes right through the middle of your toroidal field.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things about what I was saying about the Harp of David being the symbol of Ireland, we also have the lineage when the Exodus happened in ancient Egypt and the people left. Basically, the lights went out in Egypt.
Yeah.
So when the people left in the Exodus, the power, the knowledge left as well.
Yeah, brain drain.
So Egypt civilization went downhill from that point on.
They were like unenlightened.
The Enlightenment left.
Yeah, same.
So when you trace the people out of Egypt, where did they go? So you can trace the lineage of Akhenaten in the form of his daughter, her husband, and other relations and of that family, and their children, and you can trace them back to Ireland. But not only can you trace them back to Ireland, their name is on our country.
Yeah.
Their name is on our country. So the Harp of David. Now David is, as we mentioned, the great-great-grandfather of Akhenaten, who was Tutmosis III. And the symbol of David was the harp, and that harp is all over everything.
It is.
So
Irish.
don't forget the symbol of the harp as well. The strings of the harp symbolise the strings of the net or the grid.
Yes,
And the
yes.
vibration
And
of
Charlotte
creation.
here is an excellent harpist. And so the harpist was to know, as an initiate, that when they were plucking the strings of the harp, they were plucking the strings of creation. They were causing vibrations to ripple throughout
Sending
the entire
out.
Oh,
creation.
well, I'll think about that next time.
And
And
waking
you know the
everybody
ark
up.
of the harp.
Yes.
The ark of the harp is to do with the ark of the covenant and the ark of the geometry
Yeah. Wow.
as well. So
Yes, very geometrically.
the harp was created as an instrument to encode all this information.
So you're sending out the vibrations while you play.
There you
And
go.
if anybody, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listen to this probably will be Irish, but a lot of others won't be and wouldn't know that everything that comes from our government in Ireland has the symbol of the harp on it.
Yeah.
That's it.
And that's
it's on
not
our,
a
it's on our
coincidence.
passport and
It's everything.
on
It's the symbol of the country.
it's on everything, yeah. So one of the ancient names then as well for Ireland was Hibernia. And Hibernia also is connected with Akhenaten because Hibber, who was the son of Scota.
Yeah.
So Hibber would be the grandchild of Akhenaten.
Right.
And Hibber was one of the sons of Scota, who was a daughter of Akhenaten. Now, there is the suggestion that Scota could be Ankhesenamun or Meriaten.
Yeah, that's
So-
either one.
It's either one. It's either
both went missing.
Ankhesenamun or both, or Meriaten. Well, they do say they have Meriaten's body,
How many?
but they also say they have Akhenaten's body, and they don't.
I don't think
I
so.
mean, they do lie, the Egyptologists, about
How
things.
many daughters did he have?
6.
6.
Yeah. Now they say they have Meriaten's body in Egypt, but
Well, they say they have lots of stuff, but
they say
tell
they
us
have
that
Natan's body
Tutankhamun's-
as well.
Well, they won't release the information that Tutankhamun's DNA is like 86% the haplogroup of Irish people, England and Ireland.
That's a good point, Christine. The lineage of Akhenaten, and this is known through
connects to the Tower
what
Prince.
you've just said, is they were O negative.
Yeah.
Their
And
blood
O
was O
negative
negative.
is very interesting.
And
blood
Ireland has the highest rate, as well, alongside the Basque region of France and Spain.
Yes.
Ireland has the highest rate of O negative. And when Tutankhamun, that's a good point.
And that's
I didn't think of
copper-based
that.
blood. Speaking
Exactly.
of copper scrolls as well.
Yeah. And when accidentally the results of Tutankhamun's DNA was released, what they discovered was that Tutankhamun has more in connection with the Irish than he has with the ancient Egyptians.
Absolutely.
That's because he was Irish, because they came out of Ireland.
Well, there was a
and
lot
so
of
that's why they
red-haired-
came back here, and that's why the name Hibernia. Hibernia is named after the great grandson of Akhenaten,
Exactly.
and after the
Scotia's
son of Scota, who's the daughter of Akhenaten, and who's buried in Glen Scota in Tralee, County Kerry. So you'd be thinking, why, what like Ireland and not? But if you think about Hebrew, the language Hebrew, which is what Moses, aka Akhenaten, wrote the Torah, which is the Old Testament of the Bible.
Yeah.
So he wrote the Torah in Hebrew. So Hebrew, which I'm not going to get into in this podcast because it's another whole thing, and you can research it yourself. But Hebrew and Gaelic are identical languages. Irish Gaelic and Hebrew.
linked to
Like
the
ancient Irish, yeah.
yeah.
Ancient Irish
Yeah.
are the same, yes.
It's very linked to
and ancient
the fall
Hebrew are the
of
same language.
the Tower of Babel.
They're the same language,
Yes.
yeah. And it is connected to the Torah. So ancient Hebrew and ancient Irish are the same language. So the Bible is actually an Irish book. Shock, horror, drum roll.
Oh my God.
Oh, all the monks here? No, I wouldn't think it.
So like Hebrew, Om or Ogam, as some people might call it, spelled Ogham, Om or Ogam, and you'll notice straight away that Om is also the same as the chant Om,
Yeah,
Which is a
yeah.
frequency.
which is the frequency. So, like Ogam or Om, Hebrew, or as it's known as Hebrew, was a dialect, a secret dialect of ancient Gaelic, of the ancient, what would have been called, what we
Wizard
call them
keepers.
now, we call them Druids, but the ancient mystery school initiates of Atlantis in Ireland. So Om would have been a secret dialect that they had to transmit information. Not secretly, yeah, because at this time there would be people who want to
Correct.
distort and corrupt the information. So there was a time when it did have to be recorded in secret. So that brings me to the Torah, and as I mentioned, the Torah was written by Moses, aka Akhenaten. The New Testament, which the Old and New Testament is what makes up the Bible, but the New Testament was written by an Italian family, Flavia or Pisa or something like that they're called. Anyway, it was written by the Italian family.
You mean the Roman Empire was involved?
Yeah, So anyway, so the Torah is connected with Tara, the hill of Tara,
Yes.
and with, as we mentioned, the Taurus.
Yes.
But can I say one
Now,
thing?
in one, can I just say this because it's going to go around my head if I don't? Sorry,
No,
just
go
keep
ahead.
the thought.
Go
Just
ahead.
keep the thought.
It bounced off me, so I'll wait.
In one of the podcasts, I spoke about a man called Stan Tenen and
that's right.
the Meru Foundation. And this guy is a Hebrew scholar. And he actually worked on the Torah and on the first line of the Torah, which is basically, when it's translated into English, says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and God said, let there be light. So he was looking at that first line of the Torah in Hebrew. And what he did, it's too long to get into here. I did mention
It's
it in another
fascinating,
podcast.
but
What he did was he wrote all the letters out on a string of beads. And what he found was that when he actually coiled the beads around to make each letter match up with its counterpart letter,
Hebrew letters.
what he created when he finished was a torus,
Yeah.
a tube torus. Now, the thing about the tube torus was, what he did was, he took the tube torus and he created, you know the way you often see a tube torus and it has the 7 colours of the rainbow running through it.
Yeah.
So what he did was, he traced the path of one of those colours through from the outside of the tube torus into the inside, right? So it made a specific shape.
Yeah.
And then he made a mould of that shape. And he took it out. And what he realised, he made it in metal. And what he realised was, when he held it in his hand, that the mould of the shape fit perfectly into his hand,
Wow.
around his thumb and up against his fingers. So he realised it's actually a model of the hand. But what he did was, he took this mould that he made, which is, you know, the path of one ray of light going through the tube torus.
Yeah.
And so he made a solid model of it. And he took it, and what he did was, when he held it up and held it against, up to a white wall, for example, and put a light behind it, and so that the shape was casting a shadow on the white wall, what he realised was that each turn of that mould that cast a shadow on the wall, if you drew the shadow and then turned the mould again, and projected it at another angle, what he realized was that every angle that you turned that mold at created the letters of the language.
Wow. So the Hebrew alphabet.
Yes.
So you have a self-generating thing.
Yeah.
So listen to this, it's the chicken and the egg, right? So the letters of the alphabet, when put onto beads and curled around so that each letter matches up with its own other letter, okay, creates a torus. When you trace the path of the ray of light through the torus, make a solid mold of it, take it out and turn it at different angles, it creates the letter of the language. So the letters create the torus and the torus creates the letters.
So it's interchangeable.
It's the chicken and the egg, you see.
Yeah, it is. Wow.
And both of those things, the torus also creates the octahedral pyramid, which is what the Great Pyramid is. The Great Pyramid is not a 4-sided pyramid.
So the Great Pyramid is frozen letters.
It's an 8-sided pyramid.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the letters of the first line of the Torah was actually meant to be read in that way, in a spiral. That would have spiraled around
and that's
the outside of a pyramid
and not
shape.
A book.
Yeah, the outside of a pyramid shape. And that brings me to the fact that the Great Pyramid itself is the book of coming forth by light in stone.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the Bible in stone. Now, I'm saying that the Bible was written in Hebrew, which is basically ancient Gaelic. And I know it's like, when you hear it first, it sounds a bit crazy, you know, but the whole idea of the book and the geometry, the Bible and all the other religious books are written in two ways. They're written in a language, whichever, like English or Hebrew or Arabic or whatever language they're written in, but they're also written in another language, and all of those books have a code. They have a numerical geometric code that the average reader, that the normal eye does not see. The code that underlies all of those books, the Torah, the Talmud, the Quran, the code is written in number and geometry, and only those who are initiates will actually understand the code that's in the book. But I'm just going to give you a really simple example here, and I think we'll finish up fairly soon after this one. In the book of Coming Forth by Light, aka the Book of the Dead, the different chapters in the book are called by those who translated it as spells. They're called spells. So in the book of Coming Forth by Light, spell 153A deals with the creation of a net that stretches from earth to heaven, and deals with the dangers of being caught in the net rather than using the net to release yourself.
Right.
So the interesting thing about the 153 is that when you draw your first two circles of your flower of life, the viscous spacia, remember we said how two circles interconnect. When you draw that, if you draw a line straight down, in other words, the length of it, and then a line across the width of it, the dimensions you get is 265 in the height and 153 in the width. Now, that symbol, the viscous spacia, is known as the fish bladder. And it's always referred to as the fish. Now, who else do we know as a symbol of the fish?
Oh,
Jesus. So, now also, in, I just have to look, I've written it as a note here because I'm not that familiar with the Bible. In John 21:11, it talks about Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of 153 large fish. So it's called the miracle of the fish. And in the miracle of the fish, which is told in the Bible, they catch 153 fish. So the number 153, I'm just giving you an example.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Yeah.
Of the geometric and numerical code that's in the Bible, in the Torah, in the Talmud, and here's just one example, and in the Book of Coming Forth by Light, aka the Book of the Dead.
Yeah.
So it talks about, not only in the Bible, but in the Book of Coming Forth by Light, about the creation of the net that reaches from heaven to earth.
Wow, yeah.
But this net is something that you can get trapped in.
Yeah.
If you don't know it. If you know it, you can use it to free yourself.
Yeah, it's like a ladder.
But if you don't know it, you'll get trapped in it.
Like
Now,
Jacob's ladder?
You guys, Charlotte and Christine, you were in the tombs.
Yes.
In the Valley of the Kings.
Oh, yes.
In Luxor with me on the journey. So do you remember seeing all the snakes, the coils of the snakes?
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
And do you remember seeing the people who were swimming in what looked like a net?
Yeah, it looked like a pool with wavy lines, but it was the net.
So souls in the mystery schools were referred to as fish.
There you go.
Wow.
So that will give you an idea of the fish. Now, Jesus' symbol was the fish. Now, I've said before that I know that I've said that Akhenaten was Moses. In other words, the character of Moses was based on the life of Akhenaten.
And Moses is
But I'm also going to say that the character of Jesus, who there is no historical evidence for,
yes,
was based on the life of somebody who was real and who there is historical evidence for, and that was Akhenaten.
Yeah.
Now, I know there's other people with different
a lot
opinions.
Of people, I've heard that a lot.
But I know some people think it was actually Tutankhamun. But I know that it was Akhenaten.
Yeah.
And here's just one example why I would say that. Because the prayer that is in the Bible known as Our Father who art in heaven was actually written by Akhenaten.
Yeah,
and it's called A Hymn to the Aten.
The hymn to the Aten, that's it.
A Hymn to the Aten. So, and that's, of course, one of the most famous prayers in Christianity or Catholicism. So
even the Protestants say
but
it.
They wouldn't have the same wording as as the hymn.
No.
to the Aten,
The Hymn to the Aten is much longer.
But they took it from there. They took a part of it.
Yeah, the Hymn to the Aten is quite long. So they basically, the Council of Nicaea, I would say around that, took a part of it. You see, what they actually did, the Council of Nicaea and the people who created the New Testament were actually the infiltrators. They were the M1 priesthood. And what they did was, they took the knowledge of Zep Tepi, of the mystery schools, of Akhenaten and the Law of One. They took that knowledge and they kind of made fun of it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Messed around with it.
They made fun of it in such a way that, for example, Akhenaten said, I am the son of the sun. So, I am the S-U-N of the S-U-N.
Yeah.
Yeah? So, in other words, he's saying, I am the creative light. What we said, I'm the water, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or the gas, the ether. And
they turned it to S-O-N.
Yeah, and so...
I am the son of G-O-D. D-O-G.
So, anyway, there's lots of kind of
like
connections, if you like, with, for example, as I said, the Great Pyramid in the Bible is the Book of Coming Forth by Light, or the Bible in stone. Because a lot of the things from in the time of the weighing of the heart, the recently deceased has to recite the 42 negative confessions.
That's it.
And the 42 negative confessions are, I have not stolen, I have not cheated, I have not lied.
I have not
and that's what
my
became
wife.
the Ten Commandments.
Yes.
So I'll just finish on this kind of interesting side note that as well, to do with the number 153. And by the way, the reason I'm talking about that is because the fish was the symbol of Jesus. What was Jesus famous for? Jesus is famous was for his ascension into heaven.
Yes.
That's what this science is. Akhenaten, in fact, is the character that Jesus' life was based on. And the creation of this grid work, which allows us to descend into physical form, but it also allows us to ascend back into pure consciousness.
Yeah.
Except for intervention where by these kind of portals or gateways.
Or you're trapped in the net.
Literally, you're trapped in the net. By all those one priesthood who have
Can I just
continued.
I'll
Finish this
wind
point.
yourself up. I have a question.
So the idea of, for example, the Great Pyramid being the Book of Coming Forth by Light, or the Bible in stone. And I'm saying the Bible because it is this ancient information, but it was distorted. So I'm not being religious when I'm talking about religious books, because they're all based on this ancient information. I'm trying to point out that religion is a distortion of this.
Yes.
And it was created by the M1 priesthood to control people. The same as governments and all forms of systems. So the Grand Gallery is 153 feet in length. That's another interesting point to it.
Yes.
As
you ascend up the steps, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about ascending up.
Yeah,
You
the
got to
Grand
walk
Gallery,
up that measurement.
And
to
the
get
actual
into the King's
natural
Chamber.
entrance
Yeah.
to the Great Pyramid, the one that wasn't smashed into, of course, is on the 17th level.
Okay.
Now, this is kind of just playing, this is kind of numerically how these codes are worked. But if you add 17, if you add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 all the way up to 17, you'll get 153.
There you go.
Another code?
So that's an interesting thing. So yes, the Code of 9, as we mentioned, and I'm going to finish on this point, the Code of 9 was based on what was known as the Ennead. And the Ennead were the 9 gods and goddesses that made up what we were talking about, the Neter, that created this at the time of Zep Tepi. And Thoth and Mat, I mean, each female is a different aspect. Like, all the female goddesses are really one, if you like. They're just telling a different aspect of the story. And all the male goddesses equally are, or gods rather, are one, but telling, you know. So it's the whole idea of the circle and the square and the male and the female, because in geometry, curved and spiraled and circular lines are female, and straight and angular lines are male. And the same in numbers. There's male and female numbers. So even numbers are female, like 2, 4 are all female, and odd numbers, 5, 7, 11, they're all male numbers. And of course the unity number is 1, you know, which all stems from the 0.
Right.
So the mystery schools of Akhenaten was literally teaching ascension as told in the story of Jesus, and teaching the technique of manifestation, and also teaching that you are ageless, timeless, eternal, immortal. And once we become ether or energy, or go back to that state again, we return to our natural state, which is light, which is literally everywhere all at the same time.
Yeah. Conscious, like.
And so, just on the last note, I want to say that all this knowledge came out of Ireland, but it also Atlantis, Ireland. I know there was different areas, but I'm specifically talking about Ireland. And Tara being the power centre of Atlantis at that time.
Tara in Ireland.
In Ireland, the Hill of Tara. And so...
that was my point, actually, before.
Go on, go ahead.
Tara is associated with the 5th element, ether, in terms of the provinces of Ireland.
Meath,
It's
yeah. So in Ireland, there's 5 provinces, and the 5th is Meath. And
so it's the
each
5th
one
element.
is associated with one of the elements. And Meath, or Maid, which means middle, is associated with ether, as you say. But it's interesting that Egypt was dissected, if you want to say, in Upper and Lower Egypt, and its unification point was Memphis, which means middle.
Yeah.
And Ireland is dissected in Upper and Lower Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and Maid or Mead also means middle. But
so there's parallels.
Yeah. So all this information was brought back to Ireland. When Akhenaten et al., his lineage, who we see in Ireland in the form of the Tara Prince, Thoth Tepi, Scota, and her husband Godail Glass. Now Godail Glass is the husband of Scota, and the language of the Gaelic language, the story is told in the Book of Ballymote, I think it is, or the Laura Gabala era. The story is told in our Irish mythology of how Scota and Godail Glass came from the plain of Shinar, which is where the building of the Tower of Babel took place. And they brought the Gaelic language into Ireland by combining every one of the 72 languages that were confused at the Tower of Babel and the original language. And they combined them all to make Inverla or Gaelic.
Yeah.
And they brought that language, which was the secret language containing all the languages, into Ireland. So it kind of gives you an idea of why the Irish were murdered and genocided.
Oh, absolutely.
For speaking their own language.
Yeah.
Yes, get rid of it. It was pure genocide. There was no potato famine. They literally took all the food out of the country.
So
it was to decimate the cellular memory.
Absolutely.
It was to decimate the DNA.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, they put the seeds in the wind, and now it's all over the world. So if everybody wakes up to their cellular memory, they've seeded themselves all over the world.
Yeah.
So it's not just
the Irish
located.
are everywhere.
Yeah,
of course.
And that's why the Roman Catholic Church.
That's why
never
we're
got
everywhere. It's deep in our subconscious. But Irish people have migrated all over the world for hundreds of years for a particular reason.
To be there when they need to wake up.
Exactly, because they're all waking up now.
Yeah.
Because they are the mystery school.
The wisdom keepers.
Wisdom keepers.
Yeah. Their
and
DNA.
they will all begin to wake up now.
Yeah.
And they're everywhere, all over the world. They, in and of themselves, make a network and a grid work.
Yes.
that's right.
The Irish all over the world
That's really right, yeah.
make a worldwide grid work.
And they're standing on the morphogenic fields of the whole earth. So when they wake up, it's like the 100th
They're already
monkey.
waking up.
I know they are waking up.
If you look at Ireland now, and you look at everything that's going on, there's so many things going on, so many whistleblowers, if you like, people talking out about, well, actually, there's not so many, there's a handful, but they're making a loud noise, if you
Yes.
Yeah.
like. And they're talking about, corruption in, government corruption, police corruption, all sorts of corruption, in Ireland. And the people are eventually taken to the streets. So I really think that the not Celtic, because that's the Greek word, but that the spirit of the Irish people, we always had the reputation of being fiery and, full of spirit, but recently you wouldn't know that to look at Irish people, because they've literally lain down and taken all of...
They've been beaten.
They've been
to a pulp.
downtrodden by the European
That's it.
whole thing,
That's it.
But watch this space.
We'll
Atlantis
rise
is
We're
rising, and I
breaking
can
the
see
spell.
the Irish people are waking up.
Yeah,
We're breaking the
spells.
spell.
And the whole
Charlotte.
thing is, it's not physical, it's consciousness.
That's it.
It's the consciousness.
Yeah, there
which
is no-
will just change the physical reality. When you're the dreamer, dreaming the dream, you're the thought that's creating the reality.
Yeah.
When a certain amount of people change their thought of what that reality is, the reality has to change to reflect it.
Exactly.
That's it. That's
So,
It's a mirror image, right?
and so this is why the knowledge of Akhenaten, or the mystery schools of Akhenaten, and why he was so dangerous to the status quo and to the M1
Absolutely.
priesthood, and why they had to shut him up and get rid of him. Because he was literally empowering people to the degree that they were
Challenging the
remembering,
system.
they were remembering that they are the
System.
creator
They don't
consciousness.
need the guy in the temple. And also, like, he is literally, he just basically had his whole ethos was to create equality and balance, and it just wasn't the right time. But the what they're doing, as far as I'm concerned, is they're calling the heretic pharaoh, the one who created monotheism. So, like, look at that.
Oh, yeah,
They even
yeah.
so there's the distortion. That's the truth. Monotheism is that there's only one God. It's you. So they're letting a little bit out. But actually, he was a heretic. So he was just crazy. He had Marfan syndrome. He was just woofy. No, he wasn't. He knew what he knew because
Well,
he was
that's-
bringing it back.
That's it. I mean, as I mentioned, all of the religions are based on that concept of one God,
Yes.
or one God consciousness, or one creator consciousness. And
Even
even
to give you a bit.
even people in these religious institutions will say, Akhenaten, the heretic, he created monotheism. But your religion is a monotheistic. And you're saying it like as it's a bad thing. Then why are
That's a
you in it in the
distortion.
first place?
I think that's a distortion that they labeled him that.
Well, you see, because people can, say that what Akhenaten was talking about was control. Everything under one control. Now, you can look at it, you can look at it that way. The law of one can be looked at as if you're saying everything is under one control. Like, the one world government, the one world army, the one world Illuminati control and everything. Yeah, that is not what Akhenaten was talking about. No. That is what the M1 priesthood did. They turned Akhenaten's knowledge of the law of one. And under the concept of Akhenaten, the law of one was equality, balance and justice and truth for all. It was not a hive mind mentality.
Yeah.
The law of one meant that, first of all, the one was love. The creative energy of this intelligent creative energy is love. And it projects itself into this third dimension in the form of light. And so that's what he was talking about. Nothing to do with monotheism or my God is
Or
better
creating
than
a new
yours.
religion.
That's just a totally
That's
degraded,
competition. Yeah.
childish version of what he was actually trying to say.
But we're breaking the spell.
We're breaking the spell and we're winding it up. Okay.
Oh, but I want to say one
But,
thing, which is enjoy the full moon in Gemini today. It's very auspicious.
Yes, Christine, can you just give us a quick and tell us what
the
that's...
last full moon of a decade. The ending of a 7-year cycle between December 21st, like the
2012.
12. So it's and then we're going
So it's
into
7 years exactly from
yes, from
21st of December 2020.
So then we also have the tomorrow is the 12 because
12.
2019 equals 12 numerically. So we got 12.
Which is the kind
It's
of
a huge
opposite of the
portal.
21st. It's
Yes,
12.
that's it. Yeah. So portal, mirror
That's it.
imagery stuff.
Yeah.
So the full moon in Gemini, which we're talking about Akhenaten, which is talking about balance between the male and female energy. If you ask me, the sign of Gemini, right?
So,
So we're doing it on a very auspicious day. So we want to send you like love and light and energy for awakening.
And just one interesting thing that's popped into my mind as well that I meant to mention was what we were talking about, the viscous specia. When two circles interconnect, they make, and our eye is a viscous specia.
Yeah.
That's the shape. Your mouth is a viscous specia. It's the shape. Yeah. But that shape makes something that can perceive and decode the light, which is your eye.
yes.
That's right.
So by drawing those two circles
That's it.
as the first part of your geometry, it geometrically and mathematically creates a shape that can decode the information that's in light.
That's it. Wow.
Is that mind blowing or what?
That is mind blowing.
Is it just
That's
me
it.
or is that mind blowing?
Oh,
I think it's
mind-blowing.
pretty mind-blowing.
I think it's pretty mind
It's
blowing.
mind awakening.
Keep your eyes open, people.
Keep your eyes open. We're in the groove.
Okay.
Okay. So we're going ahead, and again, I just want to say at the end of this podcast about the journey to Egypt, the March 2020 journey to Egypt for the equinox. There's a special offer on that, and if you want to get to know a bit more about that, send me an email at info@floweroflight.com.
What are the dates, Antoinette, for the journey? It's March.
The 10th to the 21st of March 2020. And it's a 10-day journey of all the ancient sites in Egypt, led by myself, of course. And
ending in the Great Pyramid.
And ending on the day of the equinox in the Great Pyramid.
Wow.
And in February for Imbolic, which is the 31st, it's a weekend. So it's the Friday, Saturday and Sunday, the 31st to the 2nd of February, 31st of January to the 2nd of February. And that is a Flower of Life Sacred Geometry Metatron Cube workshop, and we'll be covering a lot of the information that I'm talking about in here, as I do on
doing it. Like,
you'll learn to draw it,
and,
and as we do on the journeys as well. And so both the journeys and the workshops are, as Christine just mentioned, because you work with the geometry, because you learn to draw the geometry from start to completion, are literally, just as Christine said, they're activations for the light body, the DNA, the higher self, and for the opening of the third eye and the crown chakra.
Yeah, and for me, I've done the sacred geometry with Antoinette. It was amazing. And I will say that because I think I've mentioned it before, but after doing the second sacred geometry class, I saw 3 pillars of emerald green light in my kitchen. And I was like, what?
Like,
and
wow,
she said to me, oh my God, you saw the pillars of Thoth. I'm like, whoa, because I can see auric fields and stuff.
And the green light is to do with the heart as well.
Yeah.
You know, the heart
activation.
Yeah, it's a heart
Isn't
activation.
it all to do with the
It sounds, we make a joke of it, but actually what your mom had was a heart activation.
No, yeah, you're right.
So, but we did make the joke, like the three green pillars, you know.
Yeah.
But so.
No, yeah.
I'm probably going to, I did kind of want to mention a bit, but I know that we're kind of a bit tight for time today, but maybe the next podcast might be about the code that I mentioned before, that everything is based on a code of 9. So
that's a good one.
Yeah.
So we've built on it now. We've got the groundwork.
Yeah, so if we're just finishing off this podcast, I'll give you 1 or 2 things to think about. So if you think about how everything is based on a code of 9, think about a circle of 360 degrees. What's 3 and 6? 3 and 6 is 9. So the entire cycle of the precessional cycle, which is not, as I said, something for another podcast, is 25,920 years. And it's called the Great Year. And it's one of the cycles that our Earth moves through, and therefore that our consciousness and physical experience of this illusory reality. But also, if you actually add the numbers in 2592, in other words, 25,920, if you add 2, 5, 9 and 2, you'll find that you get 9. If you dissect a circle into 180 degrees, 1 and 8 is 9. If you dissect it into 45 degrees, 4 and 5 is 9. So, on that note, and we'll also connect that with the Ennead and Heliopolis and the city where Akhenaten was raised.
Very interesting, and it has implications for Ireland as well.
Yeah,
you'll be fascinated.
And Akhenaten was, of course, from, in case I haven't made it clear, Akhenaten was from the Hebrew, that's how they would have seen him, Israelite.
Yeah.
And the word Israelite in ancient Egypt didn't refer to a race of people. In terms of ethnicity, it referred to the word Israelite meant foreigner. That's all it meant. It didn't refer to any race of people. The word Israelite in ancient Egypt meant foreigner. That's all it meant. Nothing to do. The state of Israel was only created in 1948, so it had absolutely nothing to do with what we think of as Israel.
Right.
And the landmass that we now know of Israel would have been Egypt, would have been the land of Egypt back in that time. So the Israelite story and the story of Jacob and the 12 tribes and all that kind of thing is all encoded information, the same as the code that was placed in all the religious books. It's a higher dimensional code that you people will be capable of working out when they are at that level of
when you've had the
decoding it
activation,
and understanding it.
You've woken it up in your auric field because all your geometry represents bodies of knowledge. So it's the activations that you need.
So think
Yeah,
about it.
I mean, all those geometry codes are carried in your energy field anyway. So when you work with the geometry, you just begin to activate them on the principle of correspondence, as above, so below.
That's it.
One last thing to distract you before we close up. We'll open the door a bit. We kept talking about the age of Pisces, but now, considering we discussed all the states of water, we have entered the age of Aquarius, the water bearer.
Exactly.
Just wanted to mention that
Very
for
good,
the
very good.
astrologically inclined.
Yeah.
So
we're in a new age.
Exactly. So as well as that, if you feel like it and you like this video, please, or this podcast, I should say, please hit the like button. And if you want to be notified of new podcasts or other videos that are coming up, just hit the notifications. And so on that note, we're going to say goodbye and thank you very much.
Happy full
Thank you
moon,
for listening.
Gemini.
And happy 12/12
Happy
tomorrow
12/12 portal of
and happy
diamond
full
plasma
moon.
light.
Yes.
And
Happy everything.
happy everything.
Happy everything.
Come visit us. Oh, happy Christmas. And
Oh, happy
come
Christmas.
visit-
Happy holidays.
yeah, and come visit us on the trip to Egypt because we're going to have a good time.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so bye for now.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.